Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Today's topic is a hot one. I am asked this all the time from intended moms and dads alike. How do I plan for a family? How do I run a business and either do part-time freelancing or full-time freelancing when I have a family or when I'm planning to add children into that mix? And so my guest today is going to give us some great overview and insight into that topic. Welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background?
Thanks, Laura. So I'm really happy to be here. My name is Arianna Taboada, and I am the founder of The Expecting Entrepreneur, which started out as a consulting firm that supports small business owners, freelancers, entrepreneurs of many stripes in planning and implementing parental leave plans that are really designed around their business model and also their personal needs. And that since has grown and shifted. And I just came out with the book under the same name, The Expecting Entrepreneur, a guide to parental leave planning for self-employed business owners. And that came out in October 2021.
And I am so excited to add that to my Amazon list later today because it's definitely something that's in my next, couple of years or next couple of months future is planning to grow our family as well. So I'm so glad there's somebody talking about this because I think it's hard, even if you're an employee, there's so much variation in terms of policies and how should you plan ahead and how does this impact your career. But as a freelancer, you don't even have those existing policies and guidebooks and suggestions, right? And so I've seen people undertake this with varying approaches. Some just kind of say, well, I'm going to plan for the immediate future. I'm going to plan for a short maternity leave. I'm either going to have subcontractors cover my work, or I'm literally just going to be out of the office for 3 months. And then based on how that goes, I will reevaluate. And I've seen people plan for childcare from day one and things like that too. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of, are there other policies and things we should know about before just going, okay, well, I have to come up with this entire system and structure myself of figuring out how this is going to work?
Yeah, so I'm definitely nodding my head as you went through that introductory piece to the question, because I also see a pretty wide variety of ways that folks approach it. And right before we started recording, we were talking about the context in the U.S. in particular, that the U.S. does not have a federal paid leave policy, which it's one of a handful of countries that does not, and it is the only high-income country that does not. And so it really, that gap in some instances has been filled by employers, but there isn't, the only thing we have at a federal level is FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, which it only applies to some businesses and only some people within those businesses larger than 50 people needing to have been in your role for more than 12 months. And it basically is a job protection act. It says, we will keep your job. You have the right to take unpaid leave for 12 weeks. To welcome a child or care for a sick family member or care for your own health. And so there is no financial infrastructure built into that. And so states in some cases have stepped up to fill the gap with their policies and programs. So this is available currently in 9 US states and DC. So for those living in Rhode Island, California, New Jersey, New York, DC, Washington, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Oregon, and Colorado. If you are a freelancer in one of those places, then you may actually have a program that has benefits that you are eligible for. The eligibility requirements vary, and kind of coverage and the amount you're paid really varies. But one of the first steps that I often recommend people looking into, if they live in one of those states, is whether they could be eligible for the benefits.
I had never heard of that before today. So I'm so glad that you're sharing this information, because I suspect there's a lot of other people who don't know about even that potential to investigate. How do I even go and figure out what the program in my state looks like, what's required, what kind of benefits could I tap into? So how did you get interested in this particular topic?
Sure. So I, like many business owners, kind of had a roundabout journey to exactly what I do now. And I'm trained as a public health social worker originally. So I worked in the kind of formal health system setting. I worked primarily in federally qualified health centers, meaning that I was working with uninsured or underinsured populations in the perinatal health period. And then I went into private practice in 2013. And what I started just noticing about people who were walking through my doors is that even though they were coming to me usually in postpartum and working through kind of physical, social, mental, and emotional health issues postpartum, that people were self-employed, and that a major pain point was this feeling of stress around leave. And so I, like any entrepreneur would, I kind of shifted and experimented with a different business model and started working with people during pregnancy explicitly to plan for parental leave from a business and operational standpoint, as well as the personal. And I've been doing that since 2015.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so needed because there's so many questions. And I like to say that entrepreneurs are always living in a sea of questions because you're always confronting a new problem that you've potentially never confronted before. Every time you up level your business, whether you're going from side hustle to full time, or whether you're growing it from full time to be a six-figure or multiple six-figure business, you're always in uncharted territory. And I think that's definitely true, especially probably around the planning for maybe the first child that you have when your business is a part of your life. So let's say that you're talking to somebody who doesn't live in one of the states where there's any benefits available. What are some of those early questions or early things to consider as it relates to kind of fitting this into your life? And what kinds of things should you at least be thinking about?
Sure. So, the vast majority of people do not live in states with paid leave programs, and so this is really applicable. Most people are funding their leave and figuring out how to plan their leave, and so there's a couple different areas that kind of cross-functional approach to planning for leave. But I'll start with one thing that I often see as most kind of first on the list to tackle, which is really thinking about what you would like your leave to look like. Like you mentioned at the beginning, without kind of a policy or a set number of weeks in mind, most people are like, can I even take leave? What would my leave even look like? And so one great place to start, I think, is actually talking to people who have a similar business model or in a similar industry and doing kind of informational interviews to gather information on what other people have done and what has worked and what has not worked for them, so that you can start from an informed place and not having to start from scratch or totally reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, I like that because sometimes there may be people who've had ideas that would have never crossed your mind, or a way that they approached it that really worked for them and their family. Or maybe it's something that they had to adapt kind of in the middle of that plan for any number of reasons. It can be overwhelming to think through some of these bigger issues, but that's a really good starting point. Talk to some people. How do you feel when they tell you the way they approached it? Does it seem like that could potentially work for you? I think one of the biggest stressors for freelancers is whether our whole family is reliant on our income, or whether it's just, it's supplemental to whatever your spouse or any other family members are earning. It's hard to disconnect this from the finances, right? And so immediately when freelancers think we're really bad about taking days off, we don't tend to take sick days. We take vacations, but it's like I hear a lot of freelancer anxiety around vacations. It's something I've talked and written about quite a bit, because the most I've ever stepped away is for 3 weeks. And that often required, 2 months of planning in advance to be able to do that. So freelancers feel a lot of pressure around, does this mean I will have no income during that time? So what kinds of things do you have people think about in terms of their options when it's very hard to see yourself as potentially making much less income, or potentially having no income during at least some of this, new child rearing, or even when the children are older, period?
Yeah. So the operational and the financial piece really intersect and are intertwined with each other. And so I often find that in order to figure out what the financial landscape looks like for your leave, looking at operations is a great exercise. And so I often have clients take 2 weeks, time track, and really closely look at what is essentially their job description. What are all of the things that are on their plate on a day-to-day basis, and which of those things are truly happening daily or weekly, and which of them are happening on a monthly or quarterly basis. And beginning to see if you have documentation for those things. So standard operating procedures or an operations manual. It doesn't have to be like an extensive, 100-page document, but being able to say, these are all the things that happen in order to keep my business running and money coming into the business. And that helps you see which of these things can either be paused without having financial repercussions, or can be delegated or batched, or outsourced completely or automated, for example. And that can give you a great starting place to think about what supports do I need in order to have these things continue to run, to keep the core business operations that impact cash flow. And blocking time on your calendar each week to do some of the, what is essentially project planning for leave. And that gives you kind of the space and bandwidth to really think about that operational and financial intersection. And that can give you a good sense of what you have to prep, or prep ahead of time, or figure out a new way of doing during the time you have off. And it is also an option, for example, with kind of content heavy businesses to have there be some things that will pause.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the freelancers that I work with, many of them are hesitant about hiring subcontractors, because I think that's one of the early, if you don't have a lot of support in your business, this is one of the early things to consider. And if this were me, I would kind of sit down and look at all of the clients that I have right now and what makes up, 70 to 80% of all of my projects, and see if I think I could continue doing them if my schedule were greatly reduced and if I needed a massive amount of flexibility, right? So if I had clients that they have calls every Monday and Friday at 1 p.m., could I continue to do that? Would I just have to be proactive in planning for childcare, or saying, yeah, I need this period off for maternity leave, and after that, I'll return as normal? Or do I need to think about hiring a subcontractor? Which of my projects would even be accessible to a subcontractor? And how much training time would I need to bring that person up to speed? Because you don't want to be learning if they can do the work when you step out in full, right? You don't want to be waiting until, okay, I'm officially out of the office, to find out that person has crashed and burned. I think for me, looking for projects that are highly flexible is really important, because you can give the client a sense of, hey, my capacity may be reduced, at least for a short while. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I can commit to doing 50% of what I'm doing now, so long as we're all sticking to the deadline, rather than you need me to be available 9 to 5. You need me to be available at specific times. Can you talk a little bit about, are there any other things that people should consider as they're doing that step back and saying, okay, these are my different options in front of me? What else should they be thinking about, particularly for freelancers who tend to run their businesses as true solopreneurs?
Right. So I think thinking about the return to work and knowing that, again, unlike in an employer scenario, as a freelancer, you might not have one day where you're 100% on leave and the next day where you're 100% back. That there really is, and it's almost like a silver lining, that there is this opportunity to have a gradual transition. What you brought up about client management and client communication is a key part and intersects with that return to work, and what your leave will look like. And so thinking about what, and you can do this by kind of creating either a spreadsheet, or if you're a spreadsheet kind of person, or kind of a Post-it sticky note type calendar, and really visually looking at what are the client projects looking like across a certain timeline. And if you kind of line up your leave with that, what does that mean for the hours that you are able to work?
Yeah.
And allowing yourself to have a gradual return, like you mentioned about kind of prioritizing flexibility above all else, can be really helpful, and also helping craft client communication. So one of the things that I find it can be the most impactful for freelancers, especially solopreneurs, are to have a series of emails prepped for your clients to really make sure that clients feel like they know what is happening and that they are taken care of. Because I think what we find is that when people are, when business owners are able to clearly articulate, I am taking leave, these are the boundaries, these are the expectations, this is how your needs as a client will continue to be met, then clients are want to be supportive, right? They're humans and they know you are a human too with human needs. And so being able to clearly let them know what is going to happen, what is that going to look like, how will communication happen, what will availability look like, and planning to communicate that during the beginning of your third trimester, reminding them right before you go out on leave and letting them know when you are kind of re-entering the workspace headspace post leave can be really key client touch points in terms of communication.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting how often this comes back to communication? Because the truth is, especially clients that have worked with you for a long time, they don't want to lose you. And so rather than just saying, I need to let this client go, start with that process of auditing where your business is at. And I think everyone should do this from the perspective of, what if something changed in your life, period, and you were no longer able to work 40 or 30 hours a week? So occasionally I will sit down and go, what if I only had 15 hours a week? Which clients can I fit into that? Which clients do I want to fit into that? And how does that influence which clients I have today? Do I need to get more of the clients that are super flexible, that give me really long lead times to create and finish a project? I think the more you think about those things, because I see parallels here between other circumstances. People who have chronic health issues, they can't always commit to, I'm going to be on my computer at this particular time. You may have to say, hey, I need a week to 2 weeks to turn something around because I don't know what days in those 2 weeks that I may be unable to work on my computer. If you're caring for an elderly loved one, right? I know a lot of people that they're the primary caretaker for a senior who has physical or needs related to dementia, and your schedule's not really your own in those situations. And so think about that now before you make those changes of what could my business look like? How do I feel about doing 10 hours of work a week or doing 15? Do I have childcare for that time if I needed it? Could I consolidate all my work into 2 or 3 days? Start asking those questions. So as after you've done your informational interviews, to be thinking about some of these ways that you could structure this so that it really supports you. And I think it's okay to go to clients too and say, I'm not exactly sure what this is going to look like yet, but after 6 weeks or 12 weeks, I'm planning to return at 40% capacity or around 50% capacity, just so they have a sense. Because I think, like I mentioned earlier, your long-term clients are going to want to continue working with you if at all possible. So, maybe there are some clients that you let go because you just don't see that arrangement. Somebody who gives you only 24 hours notice to do a project or has massive edits that it's hard for you to fit that into your schedule. Maybe those clients go, but maybe there are room for the ones you really like that provide some stability, which can be really important during that time when you don't have all the answers. I'm curious for my type A friends out there, and I'm one of them too. What role, if any, does savings play into this pre-planning process?
Yes, a big role.
Yeah.
So I think I have a whole chapter in the book dedicated to the finance piece because there are a couple different scenarios and business finances will intersect with personal finances. And so there is kind of a series of conversations and kind of investigations you can do looking at business finances and what having a cushion in the business looks like, and also thinking about how your personal financial situation intersects with that. So there are, a couple different scenarios. Sometimes people really look at their personal finances and say, "Oh, we actually have, a personal finance cushion that we can fall back on," and so I can kind of take the pressure off of feeling like I need to have the same amount of income during the months that I'm on leave as I typically have. And there are some people who say, "Oh, I do not have a financial cushion personally, but in the business I actually do, or in the business I don't." And that either of those scenarios will kind of let you figure out what your options are. Again, most freelancers are totally funding their leave. So there isn't like most people don't have just like a huge parental leave, like bucket that they have been saving into. But there are two things that I would mention in that regard. The first is that if you know you are thinking about growing your family, then creating a financial leave separate savings account and contributing to it each month is not a bad idea. That is something that people often do in kind of the pre-pregnancy planning phases. Something else you can do at that phase of thinking about a family is that as a freelancer, you can purchase disability insurance, and disability insurance will actually cover pregnancy, birth. And you purchase it like you would purchase like liability insurance through an insurance broker or other business insurances. And that is something you can tap into if you do give birth. An important thing to note is that if you're already pregnant, you cannot purchase the disability insurance then. And so it is one of those planning ahead options.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that was available either as an option. Are there general guidelines? We hear all the time things like, well, let's say you're going to quit your day job to go freelance. A lot of people will say, well, it's good to have 3 to 6 months of expenses for your business and for your personal needs in the bank, which I know lots of freelancers, including me, who have made that leap without having that safety net there. But is there kind of a general range or number that people should be aiming for, whether it's through savings or whether it's through disability insurance or state types of benefits, that you feel is a good range to be looking at?
Yeah. So I would really say at minimum, 4 weeks is kind of that immediate postpartum period where, you are really experiencing some pretty dramatic changes just on a physiological and emotional and hormonal level. And so if you are able to have the financial resources to cover that with knowing that you will not have to work during that time frame, that's kind of the minimum amount that you can really be focused on postpartum recovery, essentially. That said, I have worked with clients and do know people who really look, maybe their business is newer or they have, not been as profitable as long. And they really look at their finances and they say, I think I could only go like 2 or 3 weeks. And in that case, thinking about, again, that gradual return, making sure that you are not in a situation where you have to go back and like work 16-hour days during your first week back is really important. And so that 4 weeks is at like the minimum spectrum. And then it's kind of amazing. I have seen clients plan for like extended leaves of 10 months, 12 months, 18 months. And oftentimes those scenarios mean that they often are bringing like subcontractors or other business supports, assistance, admin help into the business. And oftentimes they are not totally off that entire time. They begin to still do business related things, but they know that they do not want to be back full time, whatever full time looked like for them. Some people it's like 30 hours, some people it's 60 hours. So this extended leave is also something that I see quite a few people do.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Are there any other kind of big picture topics that we should make sure we discuss before we close out this conversation? Obviously, your book is the step-by-step and all the important things to consider, but are there any other ones that you're like, yes, people absolutely need to know this even before they dive into the book?
Well, I would say, since you mentioned the type A folks, which I definitely identify, and I feel like, if you end up working for yourself, there's like some level of type A in you. And the reality with parental leave planning is that you plan with the information you have. And as you gather more information, as you learn like what kind of baby you have and what kind of postpartum experience you have, that plan can change. And so knowing that you are planning with a spirit of experimentation and curiosity can be a really good reminder for the type A planners who are like, I have my plan and I need to stick to it. And knowing that kind of uncertainty and ambiguity and change is the constant in that transition to parenthood. And so giving yourself a little grace and that knowledge that plans can change, that you can pivot and tweak as you go.
And having that sort of minimum plan set up for you, whether that's your expenses and savings kind of set aside so you know what you're working with, maybe saving a little more than just the bare minimum to survive during that 4 weeks or something like that, gives you the opportunity to make those changes as needed. I'm so glad you're talking about this topic because it's one of those things that we don't talk about. And yet people have so many different questions about it and they don't know how to approach it. And they want to make sure, lots of business owners and freelancers, they want to make sure I've gathered all the information. I've asked the right questions. I've hired the right people. I've, built the plan that's going to allow my business to go through this period. So I'm so excited to check out your book myself. Where can people go to learn a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing?
Sure. So the book website is theexpectingentrepreneur.com. And that's where you can find the book as well as the information about me and resources that you can download for free and use as you start thinking about a plan. And I mostly hang out on Instagram or LinkedIn just under my name, Arianna Taboada. So I'm also happy to connect with folks one-on-one if there's any opportunity or questions that people want to ask.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know this is going to be a valuable episode, not just when it's released, but I have a lot of people who go and listen to older episodes too. So I think this one will have a really good lifespan. It's such a hot topic. So I can't wait to share it. Thank you so much for coming on and being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.